Good day, this is Terry Difazio, and you're watching Dial It Up. Today, my guest is Olga Maria. She is the chair of Vermont's Libertarian Party. It's good to have you on, Olga.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
First of all, what does the Libertarian Party represent, and what does it mean to be a libertarian?
So the Libertarian Party represents small government, less taxes, more individual rights, basically less government, more you, less government, more community. What does it mean to be a libertarian? Libertarianism is really a beautiful philosophy. Our philosophy is that we believe in self-ownership. That's why private property rights are an essential component of the libertarian philosophy, because we believe that self-ownership is where private property begins, and we own ourselves. And because of that, we have a very strong stance on individual rights and the protection of individual rights. Two of the principles of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle, which basically states that no individual, no group of people, or no state have the right to impose, to use violence on other people. The only legitimate form of violence is self-defense. And another component of libertarianism is voluntarism, which basically states that we believe that all exchanges, all interactions with people should be voluntary. So that could be an interaction or negotiation for work, any type of contractual agreements, any type of agreement that involves people should be voluntary. I would consider myself a voluntarist libertarian because I think that's really an important component of the philosophy. And because of that, the role of the free market for us is very important. We really strongly believe in a free market capitalism, which people think this is what we have, but we don't. The amount of regulations and taxes and rules and centralized planning that we now see in our country and in our state really is in opposition to a free market. And a free market is where people are just free to have these interactions on a voluntary level.
This would, you bring up a good point, and this probably plays right into this recent COVID virus that's been dogging us for years now, and the fact that there were so many mandates that were put out there. And I know the Libertarian Party would be very much against that. And I happen to agree. Did the Libertarian Party do anything directly to try to fight this?
So at the time that the pandemic started and the government reaction to the pandemic, unfortunately at that time, the former leadership of the Libertarian Party was very milquetoast. They didn't want to rock the boat. And there was a lot of people like myself in local state affiliates throughout the country who really, were active and pushing back. And so some of us, what we had to do was find grassroots organizations or form them in order to have a political voice, in order to have a voice in pushing back this kind of centralized approach to a pandemic. Since then, we've been successful in making sure that we have new leadership. Because of the centralized government response to the pandemic, where you had this overreaching authoritarianism, essentially, a lot of people who were activists actually came into the Libertarian Party. Because we needed to have a party that reflected the liberty movement. And we have that now. Since our national convention in May, we were able to vote in new leadership. A lot of states around the country also had this changeover of new leadership that reflected a liberty movement that really wanted libertarianism and liberty to be at the forefront of our party, and for our party to really represent the voice of people that are pushing back against big government.
Well, it's I have always been of the opinion that when it came to mandates, they are very overreaching, and especially with the vaccine mandates and the vaccine card mandates. Now, I got the vaccine because that's my choice, and but when the government comes down and says you must do this or you must do this, and I saw this almost immediately when the Biden administration took over. They wanted to mandate everything.
And I think it's unfortunate because what started happening, actually, I think from the very beginning was this divisiveness.
Oh,
So it was
certainly,
happening
yes.
with like the mask mandates, which are unconstitutional.
They don't work anyway unless they're N95s, and then you can't breathe.
Exactly. And I think what's happened now is that since the CDC recently has completely done a 180 on their recommendations as a reflection of the failure of the last 2 years of public health policy that's been being pushed. In a sense, people are like, oh, it's vindication, but I always say vindication at what cost?
Exactly.
Because
Yes.
it's created a lot of division in families. It's created a lot of health ramifications. There are many, we see now in the long term, the ramifications, especially like for young children who are forced to mask to attend school or daycare, or just because like out of the fear that parents legitimately have because of the fear mongering that was happening in the media and continues to happen to a certain degree. The ramifications on their social and their language development. We see in Vermont in particular, there's been a spike in mental health crisis among everyone, but in particular among young people, really as a direct result of lockdowns. We've had a spike in addiction. People who are
Definitely.
in recovery. We have already, an issue here with the opiate epidemic. We're one of the states that's really hard hit. But alcoholism, and a lot of these things that are a direct result of people not only being isolated, but people who aren't able to go to work, people who aren't able to go, let's say, to their church or even their AA or their NA meetings. It's really had a serious impact. And so what we have to look at is, because the talking point will be, well, this is what the virus did. It's like, the virus didn't do it. The government response did it. And the
Definitely.
fact that so many people, unfortunately, acquiesced a lot of authority to public figures, and not really understanding that we are the ultimate ones that need to be making decisions. Everyone's an individual. So certain recommendations may not work for everyone. We have to have the power to make those choices for ourselves.
Yes, I used to be a drug and alcohol counselor, so I was particularly alarmed at how much alcohol consumption went up, how much gun buying went up, and it was a feeling of I think a lot of people just felt helpless, and they were ready. They were going to try to lash back somehow.
And interestingly enough, one of the things that was the regulations, I would say, that was actually loosened was the ability for people to buy alcohol. That was one of the things that was allowed to be essential, but people going to work or operating their own business was not essential.
Yeah, that doesn't the whole thing was so strange in that my wife goes to a Newport Baptist church. She couldn't go to church, but
Right.
we could go get liquor or a gun.
Right.
That was fine. And I noticed that her church actually was the first one to break with that and say, no, we're going to open up. And I noticed in Florida, their governor, Ron DeSantis, we vacationed down there, and a couple of churches we went to, they did the same thing. They said, no, we're not going to close.
There's in Canada, where they've had and continue to have some really serious government overreach, and individual rights infringement. There's a pastor there who was opening his church, and the Canadian police actually went in, and they physically tried to shut the church down, and he confronted them, and he's like, I'm not going to do this. This is my right. And he's since been arrested. I don't know if he's still in jail. I can't remember
I
his
think
name.
that was in Vancouver, wasn't it?
I believe so, and
Out
he's
there.
he's of Polish descent, I want to say.
Could be, yeah.
So there's some videos of him, but there's a lot of examples of this. There's the gym owners. There's a gym owner in Vermont. He was basically told to shut down. He was fined. I think he's taken it to court. I think his first case might have been, it wasn't in his favor. There's a gym owner in New Jersey. Things, you would think, okay, there's a virus. People want to stay healthy. They want to make sure their immune system's good. People that work out, this is something that helps them for a variety of reasons. Some people exercise because it's really a key component to their recovery or to their mental health or just to their
Yes.
physical health. And so it's this contradiction of the things that were good for you that you weren't able to do. Children weren't allowed to go to the playground. There were states that were actually, filling in playgrounds so that, and locking them up or filling them in with sand so kids could not go outside to play.
Yeah.
So it makes, it has to make one question, what really is the end goal? If the concern is that it's a public health situation, and yet you're prohibiting activities and access to activities that are actually good for people's health.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the reasons that libertarianism and liberty in the Libertarian Party has been growing exponentially the last 2 years, is because people are realizing that government overreach is a very real thing. It's affected their lives in an intimate way more so than it ever has. This is the most government overreach that we've lived through in my generation. I'm Generation X, and for some people in their entire life, unless you've come here from another country where you've experienced, a certain level of tyranny that we've begun to see here in the United States.
Yes, you're in the same generation as my son, who is 42, and I'm a baby boomer, and I always liken this recent business with COVID. We learned nothing from the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was a big overreach also. Yes. And this one, we learned nothing from it. Absolutely nothing from that, and how government can really intrude on people's lives.
Yeah. And one of the things I will say about the Libertarian Party is that we're consistent. So you mentioned the Patriot Act. So in terms of our understanding of our individual rights and the role of government being much smaller and allowing people to really to guide themselves in how they interact in voluntary exchanges. Our foreign policy is also consistent with that. We don't believe that the United States should be the police and should be engaging in foreign intervention or proxy wars like what's been happening in Yemen and what's currently taking place in Ukraine. One of the initiatives that the Libertarian Party of Vermont and other state affiliates, as well as the National Party, has been supporting is it's an initiative called Defend the Guard, which is a legislation which would prohibit a state's National Guard units from being deployed into active combat without a formal declaration of war by Congress. And this is the constitutional standard. And what's happened, like you mentioned, the Patriot Act is, with George Bush, the concentration of power and of war power in the executive has not been corrected. And so we continue on this path where the president has this power to deploy our troops. So this would be one way where we can decentralize that power and bring it back locally by having our legislators bring forth this initiative to create a bill for our governor to sign.
Yeah, and several of my friends were in Gulf War I. We were over in Saudi Arabia. They were, and I even know some guys that were over in Iraq. And most people don't realize this, but the last formal declaration of war was World War II.
Right.
We never declared war, and all these other wars that we've been involved in, I think Korea was called a police action.
So was Vietnam.
And
yeah.
Vietnam.
So they're finding ways to skirt the Constitution, finding ways to skirt Congress, which is really the balance of power, right? That's supposed to be the checks and balances, because Congress then is supposed to be have that check and balance by us, the voters.
Well, I have another take on it, if you want to hear it.
Sure.
I think that our Congress is gutless, and they want to pass it off on the president, so if something goes bad, they're not blamed for it. But that is what they're supposed to be doing. If there's a declaration of war, it's supposed to come through Congress.
Because then the accountability is directly with the voters. And
Yep.
I mean, we're seeing that the political class, the political elite class, I mean, and we have one in Washington, and we certainly have one in Montpelier.
Yes, it's called Chittenden County.
Right. Well, we see this huge growing disconnection with the everyday person, with the voters and our elected officials. And this happens here, and it's happening,
Definitely.
and it happens in D.C. And I think that the power dynamic has been completely switched over, whereas before our elected politicians were beholden to us, we the people and the voters. Now they're beholden to lobbyists and to special interests.
Definitely.
And the power dynamic is that, we have to turn around and ask them not to take our rights. We're writing letters to our representatives in the State House begging for them not to take our rights, begging for them not to raise taxes because of the way it'll negatively affect our families and our businesses and our jobs. And it's completely reversed than what it's supposed to be.
I have confronted my representative here locally, and we just lost a representative. He's in another district now. They've redistricted Vermont.
Yeah.
But Republicans generally were against this mask mandate, but that wasn't the case here in Newport. And it's interesting, most of the politicians up here are somewhat libertarian. Most of them are, not all, but most of them are. And I've had a few of them on here. It just seems funny that Vermont was always a very conservative state. For years, there was always a Republican governor, and they were fairly conservative. Now it's flipped completely the other way.
Well, and even with the Republican governor that there is essentially someone who's beholden to the progressive elite that we have in Vermont that's really concentrated in Chittenden County and, a couple of other areas there.
I think someone told me it's Chittenden, Addison, and Franklin, essentially other power brokers here in Vermont.
Franklin County, Vermont?
Yeah.
I find that so hard to believe because it's such a rural state, and it's actually the state that I drove through the most when I was working, and I was surprised to, talking with people, how much more kind of liberty-minded or like conservative they were. But I know, like, Washington County, like Montpelier area, and even down south, maybe like Brattleboro area.
Oh yeah, they were.
There's a few kind of pockets, but and unfortunately, Chittenden County, because of the concentration of people that are there, and so many folks that are, generally from out of state, like college students who really aren't living here long term, but they get to vote. They really have skewed the state extreme left, and so these policies are kind of, made, and decisions are made, but the people that are making them really don't travel to the rest of the state, which is incredibly rural. With people who really want less government and want more direct local, power over, their businesses or their schools. And and most of these decisions are now centralized in Montpelier, and people don't have a say. I mean, just looking at the response to the pandemic, we were locked out of our state house. And unfortunately, we had politicians on both sides of that aisle that were okay with keeping people out.
Yes.
And with, and with saying that unless you had a pharmaceutical product injected into your arm, you were not allowed in the State House. That's probably like one of the most un-Vermont things that I can imagine.
Yeah, well, it's gone. What used to make me chuckle was everybody would say, "Oh, this is socialist." I'm sorry, it's gone way further than that. It's actually what I call neoliberal fascism. That's what it's become. The left has gone so far left, they're not even progressives or liberals anymore. They've gone way over to the radical side. Whereas, remember when Bush and Cheney were in office?
Oh, gosh.
Everything went all the way to the right with the Tea Party movement, and it was like either extreme is not good for us.
Right. I mean, the way I understand it, and the way that a lot of libertarians are looking at things is you have authoritarianism, and there's a variety of flavors, right? You can be a socialist, you can be a fascist, you can be
Communist.
a communist. There's all types of flavors, but at the end of the day, it's authoritarian because one, it's not voluntary. Two, they're willing to use violence. They're willing to use the force and its centralized power. And then on the other hand, you have liberty. You have libertarianism, where people are free to engage with one another, where, we believe in self-defense, but what we promote most of all is peace. And you mentioned like guns. We are the fiercest defenders of the Second Amendment. We really believe in gun rights because what we see is that the concentration of violence and weaponry is with the state. It's with the police and the military. And really the whole point of the Second Amendment was to decentralize the power of people's right to self-defense away from that, because that is what ensures freedom. And as we can see is push for more gun control. I'm from New York City, and
So am I originally.
And I was a paramedic and an EMT, and I worked in healthcare, and I can tell you that from experience, You can have all the gun control, like we do in New York, like they do in Chicago, and more laws like this don't work because the people that
Nope.
are intent are on, doing harm. The people that are intent on committing crimes, especially crimes of violence, they're going to get their weapons by keeping keeping people's ability from owning a firearm and trading. You actually just are opening us up to being victims. And one of the reasons why New York City, for example, fell into so much crime is because of the gun control laws that they started enacting in New York City. As you can recall, I mean, I was born in the 70s, so like I remember New York City when it was the gritty city. And that pull away where people were able to have, a gun in the house to make sure that if someone was breaking in, they would stop because someone would be like, you're not going to come in that house because, and I think that was something in Vermont that, Vermont is one of the places where there's the lowest crime. And one of the reasons for that is because a lot of people know that most Vermonters, have a weapon and know how to use it, whether it's because they're hunting or they have it for self-defense for their home. I think as more gun control laws are want to be passed in Vermont by, specific legislators and specific people that are running for office, we're going to see high crime. We're already starting to see it in Burlington.
Yes, that's a whole nother issue. We could spend hours about. And their response to defunding the police was, I don't even want to start there. But anyways, we were talking about Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen, and I told you that I went to high school with Spike's mom.
That's awesome.
And I did vote for him.
So Spike Cohen, we got to get you on. Spike Cohen, we got to get you on this show so you can talk to Terry about your mom.
By the way, if you're watching Spike, and I don't know if you are, but I will tell your mom this. I have run some of your videos. He had a short spot, a 3 or 4 minute spot, and then a half-hour interview, and I was given permission to put it on, and I have put it on, and I will put it on again.
Nice.
So
yeah, Spike Cohen is one of he's one of the best and amazing voices that we have in the Libertarian Party. I mean, he really gets out there, and he gets our message out. And one of the things that it's kind of funny if you follow Spike Cohen on Twitter or on Facebook. One of the things that he enjoys doing is he likes to troll. He likes to troll like the FBI and the ATF and all different types of police department to kind of like show the hypocrisy of just these out of control budgets, these out of control policies that really end up hurting people and are doing the opposite of what our intention is as a free country.
Well, for all of you who remember the Iran incident when they took our embassy, we are responsible for that because the CIA convinced the president at the time, Eisenhower, convinced them that what was his name, Mossadegh, was going to side with the Soviet Union and take all their oil, and we overthrew this guy, a democratically elected. He was elected by his Congress. And we ended up with the Shah of Iran.
Right. It made them go even more extreme.
Yeah, and they went so extreme that.
And we've seen that, and we've seen that particularly in the last 30 years now with our interventions in the Middle East, how as a direct result of U.S. intervention, there's been individuals who are propped up as leaders or become leaders of even more extremist groups.
We did the same with Pinochet in Chile.
Right.
And we did the same with, when we were in Vietnam, we propped up DM and his own people killed him.
Yeah.
So this regime change, it's obvious that we're muddling into way too many things. We got out of Afghanistan recently. We're still not out of Iraq. And no one even talks about that anymore. We're still pumping money into that.
There's a lot of areas where, unfortunately, the U.S. is involved in that we don't even talk about, that we don't even hear about.
Of course,
and complicit in that is the media. They've become mouthpieces for the regime, essentially. We really saw that in the last 2 years with the pandemic response.
Yes.
But we definitely are seeing that now also, and we've been seeing that for the last, 20 years with our foreign policies. So now more recently with Ukraine, and then Ukraine kind of falls off, and then it's like it's going to be another area. But we never hear about Yemen. We don't hear about what's still happening in Syria. We don't hear about what's happening in so many other areas. And when you do on the mainstream media, I don't care what channel you watch, you're only really getting like one
Yes.
one aspect of it, and then like two different people arguing that one aspect, but you don't really get the whole picture.
Yeah, and they talk over each other, so you can't even hear what they're saying.
Yeah.
It's really funny when whether it's Fox News or whether it's MSNBC or CNN, they're all geared at a specific agenda, and you're never going to get the actual truth out of any of them.
Yeah.
And I because I used to watch like Rachel Maddow, then it's like, yeah, you're making all these promises, but nothing's happening.
Yeah.
You're saying this, and this, but who's doing anything about it?
And I think it's so important to follow those independent journalists and independent, people that are really doing a lot of good research. One of the resources that I have found to be really great for foreign policy and understanding is Scott Horton. So he's the director of the Libertarian Institute. He also runs antiwar.com. So for people who are interested in understanding like kind of a bigger picture and how much we are actually involved foreign policy from a libertarian perspective, I would check out those places.
We are almost out of time, but I want you to mention this Freedom and Unity Festival.
Okay, so we are having our Freedom and Unity Festival. I'll give you the flyer so you can put it up. It's happening Saturday, September 24th in East Hardwick, Vermont. We're going to have food, music, vendors, camping's available. And basically, it's a Liberty Festival. So it's an opportunity for people in Vermont and people in the local area to come experience what Liberty's about. There's going to be a free market area with vendors, so you can buy, raw milk and raw cheese and all that. You can barter, all that good stuff. That's happening in East Hardwick on the 24th. And you can go to the website, which is fufest.com, where you can buy tickets. The other thing is check out our libertarian candidates that are running for office. We have Erica Reddick, who's running for U.S. House of Representatives, and we have other folks that are running for local, statewide offices as well. And you can go to lpvt.org/candidates to check them out.
That sounds great. I think I will definitely do that. I'll be putting up a slide for that so people will know how to contact you. I want to thank you. Yes, that is actually incorrect to say that. I am taking this opportunity to thank you for being here. Because as I once said, I'd like to thank you, and the person said, well, go ahead and thank me then. And I said, you're right. Thank you very much. And we will have to do this again sometime.
It went by too fast.
Yeah, it definitely did. This is Terry Difazio for Dial It Up, saying that if you don't like the answers you got here, don't bother asking the questions. Goodbye now.